Honourable Mike Woodhouse.
I do promise the House that I won't, and the committee that we won't turn this into the Galloway-Woodhouse show, but Mr Lees-Galloway has raised some very important points that I think probably bear addressing now and will help frame the rest of the debate on this part. Actually, in doing so, my view actually is that he, in starting his intervention, suggested that 67E 2 was so important because without it we entrenched 0 hours, and then went on to explain why that wasn't the case. And I'll explain what I mean, because actually he has raised the very important concern that some listening will have, which is if we came out of Select Committee with a bill that allowed people to have an availability provision but no commitment of hours, why is it such a big improvement to have the commitment of even 1 hour of work and a provision for an availability of hours? Why does that make such a big difference? And he did allude actually to the answer to that question, because it's not appropriate, as he didn't do this, but it wouldn't be appropriate for anyone to read the amendment in his SOP in isolation of 2 or 3 very other important clauses in this bill. Because, with respect, Mr Lees-Galloway actually articulated the position of the bill without the amendment as inferring that the availability provision would not be without feta, and that is simply not true. There's no expectation that somebody should be available without other things happening, and I want to go through what they are. Firstly, in clause 67E3A, an employer cannot just make an employee available. They need to have reasonable grounds to do so, genuine reasons based on reasonable grounds. I would suggest I might be busy on Friday night, might not, is not reasonable grounds, because that's actually what's been happening, particularly in the hospitality industry. And then he went on to quite rightly point out the key to this, regardless of his amendment, which is 67E3B. The availability provision provides for the payment of reasonable compensation to the employee for making himself or herself available to perform the work under that provision. It has to be in writing. That's what clause 3A says underneath it. It's not enforceable unless it's agreed in advance. That too is a significant change. All changes the Select Committee have made to strengthen the issues around availability. And then Mr Lees-Galloway quite rightly points out the issue of proportionality. And that's the key to this around the 1 hour question. There will be a concern, perhaps from union members and delegates, that there is a risk that an employer make a commitment of 1 hour of work and then have an availability provisions. Firstly, it has to be on reasonable grounds. I can't imagine for the life of me how that could be reasonable. But it would be open to them to demonstrate that. And secondly, it has to be compensated for. But thirdly, as Mr Lees-Galloway says, it has to be proportionate. So it is simply not lawful once this bill is passed to say, I'll give you 1, but you've got to be available for 39. Even if that compensation is reasonable, it's not proportionate. And therefore, it would be ruled unlawful under the Act when it's passed. So I think it's really important. I don't want to labour the point about availability or about whether this is a big change or a small change, because I think we're going to get over the line anyway. But I do encourage members, when they're considering these clauses, these crucial clauses, to look at them holistically, both with the reasonableness, the proportionality, the requirements to compensate for availability, and now Mr Lees-Galloway's expectation that it should be a mutual commitment of ours. I'll just finish what I hope will be my last intervention, unless there are some quite specific technical questions around the cancellation of shifts, because I think this is a very important issue that requires, in advance again, there to be very good reasons. And we've worked again quite hard with officials to make sure that while we don't prescribe every situation where that might be appropriate, we do give broad guidance, not just to the employers, but to employees as well, about when it would be appropriate in the circumstances. I think in the horticulture industry, weather disruptions are pretty normal. But the key to this is actually the commitment of hours. So the cancellation of a shift, if you have a mutual commitment of, say, 16 or 24 hours, would then have to automatically be put into the next day if you've got a commitment to work those hours of a week. there is also a requirement for compensation, even if they're extra hours.
Grant Robertson.